Welcome everyone to Cellular Wisdom, where we dissect health myths with a scalpel and a smile. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident observer of the human condition, mostly squinting at the world's oddities.
And I'm Alara Sky, the self-proclaimed comedic natural health nerd. I bring the sharp mind, the sharper tongue, and a flair for sipping green juice while telling you that you've been cooking your food in the most ironically damaging way possible. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom.
Today we're diving into the high drama of iron. Yes, you heard that right. Iron, that unstoppable juggernaut we associate with barbecue grills, superhero suits, and the approximate heaviness of my mood after the holidays. But apparently, it also has a lot to do with bone health and fracturing things you'd prefer not to fracture.
We're talking about the brand new best-selling book from Dr. Joseph Mercola. He's apparently written something that everyone's snapping up. If you're ever bored, you can amuse yourself by scoping out your local bookstore to find it next to the diet books nobody's reading because they're busy Googling the next miracle cleanse. But while you're at it, you might want to check out your iron levels. They're a little more important than the passing kale smoothie fad, if you can believe it.
The main concern is that high iron levels threaten bone health, particularly vertebral fractures. If you've ever had a vertebral fracture, you'd probably prefer a rerun of your least favorite childhood TV show rather than go through that again. It's definitely not a pleasant experience, from what the experts say.
But let's step back for a moment. Dr. Mercola points out that there's a sweet spot for iron. Too little iron, and you get anemic, exhausted, and ironically not up for any Ironman competitions. Too much iron, and you basically corrode yourself from the inside. We're going to examine this strange phenomenon, where iron not only helps build blood cells, but also likes to lurk around causing all sorts of damage when it's in excess.
We see that the conversation around iron can be a bit polarizing. Some folks want to pop iron-fortified cereals morning, noon, and night. Others avoid it because they've heard it can speed up aging. Somewhere between "I can't get enough" and "hide the skillets" is a balanced approach, right?
Exactly. And that's something we'll unpack. But first, let's highlight the main event. This analysis from Dr. Mercola pinpoints the threat of high serum ferritin levels, particularly above 1,000 micrograms per liter. That's a big number if you're used to seeing ferritin in that typical double or triple-digit range. Above 1,000 is basically your body screaming, "Hey, I'm stockpiling this stuff to a concerning degree."
Apparently, having ferritin that high can raise your fracture risk by 91%. Now, I don't know about you, Alara, but if somebody said, "Go about your day, but you've got a 91% higher chance of fracturing your bones if you slip on a banana peel," I'd either avoid bananas for the rest of my life, or I'd start reevaluating my approach to my skeleton. Vertebral fractures, no thanks.
I'd happily skip the banana peel pratfalls. Life hands you enough comedic episodes without messing with the possibility of fracturing your vertebrae. And it's not just about avoiding a painful misstep. Bone strength is central to healthy aging. People talk about cardio health, gut health, mental health. Nobody brags at dinner parties about their robust bone density, but maybe they should.
Picture it. "Hi, my name's Greg, and I've got 105% of the average bone density in my femurs. Let's talk about that over the cheese dip." He'd be the star of the party.
Or the butt of jokes. But who's counting? Iron overload, often called IO, has loads of underlying causes. Hereditary hemochromatosis is a big one. Then you've got conditions like thalassemia and sickle cell disease that involve frequent blood transfusions, leading to too much iron in the system.
So it's not just about chowing down on the entire cast iron cookware set. Some folks have a genuine genetic or medical reason for elevated iron. If the body can't effectively excrete iron, it stockpiles it in organs, like a collector who's gone from a modest stamp album to an entire warehouse of stamps.
Yes, and it can end up in the liver, heart, and anywhere else that will accept that enormous deposit of iron. This is where the research points to a link between chronic liver diseases, like hepatitis C, or even non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the inability to regulate iron. Postmenopausal women might also experience a spike in iron levels because they stop shedding iron monthly.
So, ladies, there's a certain irony that after decades of dealing with those monthly inconveniences, You get a lovely gift called iron overload if you're not careful. I can't decide which part is more insulting, but enough about that. Let's talk about the actual bone dynamic. The big news is that high iron leads to bone breakdown. Dr. Mercola's analysis mentions that iron sets off an increase in osteoclast activity.
Right. Osteoclasts are the demolition crew. Then you've got osteoblasts, who are the builders. If your demolition crew gets a sugar rush from all that iron, they might go on a rampage, tearing down bone structure faster than the poor osteoblasts can rebuild.
That's the simplified version, but yes, it's basically a seesaw. You don't want the seesaw so lopsided that you're left with mere splinters. And apparently, reactive oxygen species, commonly shortened to ROS, play a big part in this. Too much iron triggers these nasty free radicals that attack bone cells. They reduce their function, hamper bone formation, and that further increases the risk of fractures.
In other words, you have a meltdown on a microscopic level. It's quite the fiasco. Iron fueling oxidative stress, which stunts the osteoblasts, encourages the osteoclasts, and basically you're left with a skeleton that's more like a Jenga tower waiting to topple.
Yes, please. Meanwhile, ironically, not enough iron is also bad. It impairs osteoblast function so that you can't build bone properly, which is the comedic cosmic joke in all of this.
So, too little iron means your construction team is on indefinite holiday. Too much iron means your wrecking crew is working overtime. Balance is the name of the game. This is basically the theme of biology. Eat too little, you wither away. Eat too much, you get stuffed to the gills and face health issues. Our bodies just want equilibrium.
But how do we keep iron from galloping out of control? Dr. Mercola has some suggestions. He starts with, get your iron tested. A serum ferritin test is an easy blood test. Nothing elaborate or reminiscent of horror movies, just a simple blood draw.
You want ferritin below 100 ml, he says, ideally in the 20 to 40 range. Drop below 20, that signals a deficiency. Above 100, and you might want to pay closer attention. And if you're climbing up into the high triple digits, your bones might start sending you postcards that say, "We're not okay."
He also mentions GGT, gamma-glutamyl transpeptidase. GGT is another interesting marker because it can show how much free iron might be lurking around, wreaking havoc, as well as your risk for sudden cardiac death, insulin resistance, and other cardiometabolic issues.
Right, but the star remedy for high iron is straightforward. Donate blood, 2 to 4 times a year, which might help you feel like a philanthropic hero, saving lives while simultaneously reducing your personal risk of being devoured by your own iron supply.
It's a win-win, and if you're not a candidate for standard donation for any reason, you can do therapeutic phlebotomy under a doctor's supervision. But the principle is the same. Remove some blood so the body has to replace it, and that uses up excess iron.
You've also got the simpler steps. Watch your cooking methods. Cast iron pans can leach iron into your food. Now, some folks tout that as beneficial if you're iron deficient. But if you're prone to iron overload, maybe that's not your best choice for daily cooking. Also, be mindful of iron-fortified processed foods, especially cereals, which often have more iron than your body truly needs.
And limiting alcohol helps too. Alcohol not only burdens the liver, but increases iron absorption. So a robust cocktail hour might lead to more robust iron levels. That's not exactly the type of robust you want.
Dr. Mercola also says that optimizing your calcium and copper intake plays a role. Calcium competes with iron absorption, so if you're getting good calcium, you're not letting iron hog all the absorption highways. Copper is also important for making iron metabolism function smoothly. If you have too much iron and too little copper, you're basically running your metabolism with a mismatch.
Yes, most people don't realize that copper is crucial in iron regulation. If your copper's low, your body can't properly handle iron, so you end up in a swirl of iron overload and potential deficiency in the same breath, ironically enough. Dr. Mercola mentions that many folks might need extra copper, up to 3 to 4 milligrams a day in the form of copper bisglycinate. Or they could incorporate copper-rich foods like bee pollen, grass-fed beef liver, and acerola cherries, Because if you're going to get your copper, why not in a tangy fruit that's also loaded with vitamin C?
Acerola cherries are quite the ticket. They come with that tyrosinase enzyme containing copper and tons of vitamin C. And retinol, found in beef liver and organs, helps make that copper bioavailable. So it's an entire synergy. It's like building a puzzle. You need all the pieces, calcium, copper, vitamin C, retinol, to keep your iron from going rogue.
So let's connect these dots. The main reason it all matters is that iron is a double-edged sword. Without enough, you can't make hemoglobin, you can't transport oxygen, you feel lousy. But with too much, your tissues get oxidized, your bones suffer, your risk of fractures skyrockets, and you might end up on a first-name basis with your orthopedic surgeon.
Which I think is the punchline. Too much of a good thing is definitely not a good thing. People get comfortable with the idea that iron is essential. Like if you're tired, you might blame iron deficiency. But ironically, sorry, no pun intended, but that pun's never going away. Sometimes fatigue is from iron overload. It can create a slump in your energy, too. So you can't just assume tiredness equals low iron. That's why testing is so important.
The conversation around bone density is typically dominated by calcium or vitamin D. We don't often hear about iron as a hidden villain in the bone story. Everyone's heard, milk does a body good, or soak up that sunshine vitamin. But if we're ignoring iron overload, we're ignoring something that can cause just as much bone trouble.
Vertebral fractures were found to be the most common among these patients, with significantly high ferritin levels. That's a big deal. Vertebrae are literally your body's trunk line. A fracture there is not just a nuisance. It can be debilitating. And apparently, the fracture risk is consistent in both males and females.
So no one's safe, basically. The moral, watch your iron. Meanwhile, let's also talk about the genetic side. Hereditary hemochromatosis is caused by a mutation in the HFE gene. That gene basically tells your body, go ahead and absorb more iron than you need. Don't worry about it. Next thing you know, you're at 1,000 ferritin, and your bones are staging a protest.
Then there's thalassemia and sickle cell disease. People with those conditions often get frequent blood transfusions, so that's a direct route to piling up iron. Throw in chronic liver disease, and you have a perfect storm. The liver can't produce hepcidin properly if it's damaged, and hepcidin is the hormone that helps regulate iron. So the body's basically lost its main traffic controller for iron. Chaos ensues.
Diagnosing IO can be challenging because it can mimic other conditions. People might just feel tired, have joint pain, or get odd symptoms that doctors don't always pin down to iron. By the time they find out, it might be because something else went really wrong, like advanced liver disease or serious joint issues.
Back to the bone side of things. If you have a 91% higher risk of fractures, that's basically a warning sign telling you to pay attention. There's a difference between modestly high iron and stratospherically high iron. We're not talking about a slightly elevated ferritin at 120 or 150. The real alarm bells are for those who are well above that. Still, it's best to keep it in the sweet spot.
Which is why the approach of giving blood a few times a year makes sense. It's relatively simple. Plus, if you can do it at a drive or donation center, you're helping someone else. I always like the fact that you can do good for your community while also eliminating a problem for yourself. It's like regifting that sweater you never wore, except it's your blood, which is somehow more generous and less tacky.
Yes, just make sure you don't mention regifting to the nurse when you show up. Might raise some eyebrows. But the result is ironically the same. You lighten your iron load and keep your bones safer. Because as soon as you remove blood, the body draws on its iron reserves to build fresh red blood cells. That's how it flushes out the extra iron.
We should also talk about how both ends of the spectrum, overload and deficiency, are detrimental. As Dr. Mercola's analysis points out, deficiency can hamper osteoblast activity. Then you're left with brittle bones for a different reason. The key is that bones require balanced resources, a synergy of minerals, vitamins, and the right hormone signals. If you tip any one of them out of balance, you create problems.
Yes. And the interplay with oxidative stress is crucial. Excess iron ramps up ROS, which damages cells. It's not just your bones that can get hammered. Your arteries, your organs, your everything might take a beating, courtesy of these free radicals. That can lead to all sorts of degenerative conditions. It's basically a body-wide sabotage. People might recognize that from seeing how rust works on metal. Internal rust, on a biological level, isn't so visible, but it's just as real.
It also underscores why men especially need to pay attention. Women have a sort of built-in advantage before menopause because they lose iron every month. Men can quickly accumulate iron if they're not donating blood or if they have a genetic predisposition to overabsorb it. That's probably a partial reason why you see higher rates of certain issues in men after a certain age.
One day, you're bragging about your robust health. The next, you're told your ferritin is out the roof, and you're at risk for bone fractures, heart issues, and all the fun stuff that comes with iron overload. But the bright side is that we have solutions, and they're not rocket science.
Donate blood, watch your diet, be mindful of cooking methods, watch out for fortified foods, and keep an eye on your copper and calcium levels. Those are straightforward steps. It's not like you have to sign up for a complicated regimen or an iron overload boot camp, though that does sound like an interesting reality show concept.
We'd watch people being forcibly turned away from their beloved cast iron skillets, tears streaming down their faces, exclaiming, "But how will I cook my breakfast eggs without my mighty iron pan?" Meanwhile, the trainers stand there yelling, "Step away from the skillet!" We might have a ratings hit.
We might. Throw in a cameo from Dr. Mercola, calmly explaining, "This is for your own good, trust me." But let's not give away too many potential million-dollar ideas. The underlying message, iron is crucial, but not in massive excess. The bone is living tissue. It's constantly remodeling. If you tinker with the signals controlling that remodeling, you get disequilibrium.
Yes, and the scientific literature is quite clear. In conditions like hereditary hemochromatosis, thalassemia, sickle cell anemia, over 70% of those with sickle cell and 60% with thalassemia had decreased bone mineral density. That's huge. More than half the population in those groups is dealing with compromised bones.
And that leads to fractures that can be absolutely life-altering. So while it may sound like an obscure topic, it can become painfully relevant if it's ignored. The good news is that Dr. Mercola's piece and others like it are raising awareness. This isn't some hush-hush niche issue. It's something we all need to pay attention to if we care about aging well.
Aging well and maintaining the ability to stride confidently down the grocery aisle without worrying about a small slip that could lead to major fractures. I like that future version of myself. She's sassy, stable on her feet, and fully aware of her ferritin levels.
And she probably corrects friends at dinner parties who say, "I'm so tired, maybe I should take more iron pills." She's like, "Get a test first, buddy, or you'll be collecting more iron than your body can handle." Maybe that's the final punchline. Get tested, don't guess.
Exactly. Testing is not that complicated. It's less painful than fracturing a vertebra, I guarantee you that. Meanwhile, we'd be remiss if we didn't remind people that Dr. Mercola's new best-selling book covers a wide range of topics like this. How to manage your health on a cellular level, all to help you live stronger, feel better, and presumably star in your own comedic monologue about the wonders of biology.
Perhaps the best comedic monologue is the one that never ends in a hospital bed. Now, I'm not trying to be too grim, but let's face it, bones are a big deal. We can't cart ourselves around in a wheelbarrow. If we want to remain mobile and independent, we have to treat our skeleton well.
That's the moral of the story here, folks. Iron overload is a thing. It's more common than you might realize, and it can severely compromise bone health. You do not want to wake up one day with an unexpected fracture that could have been prevented by simply managing your iron levels.
But as always, we deliver this message with a hint of comedic flair, because nothing says cellular wisdom like two talkative wiseacres reminding you to go get your blood tested. So let's pivot to a bit more detail. How do you know if you might have high iron? Some typical signs might be fatigue, joint pain, abdominal pain, even a bit of a bronze tint to the skin if it's advanced.
Then again, it can also be silent. That's the biggest catch. Some folks have no clue until labs reveal it. If you suspect anything, or if you imply want that peace of mind, ask for a serum ferritin test and maybe a GGT test, because guesswork is for carnival games, not your health.
If you find out your ferritin is, say, 500, That's above normal, but not apocalyptic. You can start adjusting your approach, like donating blood a couple of times and seeing if it comes down. If it's above 1,000, you might really need to stay consistent with donation schedules. Dr. Mercola mentions 2 to 4 times a year, or even smaller amounts monthly.
We even have recommended volumes depending on your situation. Men might remove 150 milliliters monthly, postmenopausal women 100, premenopausal women 50. It's these small amounts that keep iron from accumulating. But obviously you tailor that to your personal labs and discussion with your health professional.
Yes, but no disclaimers that people must consult their doctors. We trust our audience is bright enough to do what they need to do. We're just the comedic messengers. The main principle is that blood removal is the best route to reduce stored iron.
On top of that, reducing iron exposure in the diet can help. Check your water source if you use well water. Sometimes there's a lot of iron in it. Or reconsider the perpetual use of cast iron cookware. Some folks are proud of that black skillet that's been passed down 4 generations. I'd say use it if you're low in iron, but if you're high, maybe not daily.
It's about that golden ratio, folks. Or should I call it the rust ratio? Iron is so prone to oxidation that it literally rusts. Let's not rust from the inside. We can stay well lubricated, figuratively speaking, with balanced minerals. One key step is making sure that if you do need to supplement with copper, you do it thoughtfully, because copper and iron are like 2 siblings who have to get along for the family to function.
It's definitely a sibling rivalry at times. Let's mention the synergy with retinol too, making copper more bioavailable. That's found in foods like beef liver. If you're squeamish about organ meats, there are freeze-dried capsules nowadays that make it a bit easier to handle. Or you can hold your nose and do it the old-fashioned way. But I suspect you'd have to pay me in comedic giggles to eat it frequently.
You're not alone. But Dr. Mercola's analysis suggests it's worth the sacrifice if you truly want to optimize that copper balance and keep your iron in check. Now, if that's not something you can handle, you can explore other copper-rich foods or some well-chosen supplements.
Absolutely. Let's also tie back to bone health specifically. Once you remove the excess iron and correct any underlying imbalances, you're also giving your osteoblasts a chance to rebuild. Throw in good lifestyle habits for bone density, like weight-bearing exercise, sunlight for vitamin D, enough magnesium, and you might experience a real difference in how you feel, how sturdy your bones are, and how easily you bounce back from small impacts or injuries.
Which is all we want in the end, a bit of resilience. The body is marvelous at self-repair if we get out of its way. But that's the comedic tragedy. We humans keep accidentally standing in our own way, ignoring lab tests, ignoring dietary signals, and then we wonder why we're feeling subpar.
But we can take heart that each step we take is a step away from the chaos. And we can also raise a metaphorical toast to the brand new best-selling book by Dr. Mercola, which presumably delves into more of these cellular wisdom topics. He's got a knack for explaining how our bodies work at that fundamental level.
He sure does, and we have a knack for taking that science and making wisecracks about it. But hopefully it helps people remember the core message. Keep your iron in that sweet spot, or your skeleton will not be pleased.
We want to preserve your comedic bones too. We need them if you're going to endure our brand of humor in the long run. So let's do a quick recap of the major points in a conversational bullet style. 1. High iron equals higher fracture risk. 2. The sweet spot for ferritin is 20 to 40 ng/ml, but under 100 is generally okay. 3. If you're soaring above that, think about donating blood. 4. Balance your minerals, especially copper and calcium, so your iron can't throw a riot in your cells.
And 5. Try not to cook every single meal in cast iron if you suspect you have high iron. 6. Limit your alcohol because that'll absorb more iron, plus stress the liver. 7. Consider a GGT test if you want a bigger picture of what's going on. 8. Appreciate the comedic irony that iron deficiency and overload can both weaken bones. And 9. Brag about your bone density at dinner parties, because we think it's the new cool thing to do.
And 10. Pick up Dr. Mercola's new best-selling book if you really want to explore more ways to keep your cells from staging a meltdown. That might not be as comedic as we are. He's a bit more straightforward. but he definitely has the knowledge base.
Now, we'd be missing something if we didn't point out that bones are influenced by a wide array of factors: hormones, diet, exercise, stress, you name it. But from the vantage point of this episode, iron is a major piece. We can't cover everything in one sitting, but it's sure fun to try.
You got that right. And I think we've hammered home, pun intended, the big risk of letting your ferritin soar. Nobody wants to be in the 2.5 times higher risk category for vertebral fractures. That's not the kind of statistic you brag about, that's the kind you vow to change.
Absolutely. So let's do a final comedic spin. Suppose your iron levels are high. You're reading the lab results, and it's basically telling you that you're forging your own personal iron throne. Some might think that's cool, like you're a Targaryen or something. But the difference is, you don't want to sit on that throne, because your bones are literally at risk.
So your next step is to dethrone the iron. If you want a real throne, make it from something benign like plush velvet. Meanwhile, let your body maintain the iron levels it needs without the comedic meltdown scenario. That's the moral of the day, folks.
We trust you've gleaned some cellular wisdom from our discussion. As we always say, there's no better combination than a healthy sense of humor and a healthy skeleton. Actually, that might be the first time we've said that, but I think it's a new motto.
Let's keep it, because we might as well remind ourselves that humor keeps us sane, and strong bones keep us upright. If you want to keep hearing us talk about biology with comedic undertones, make sure you tune into our next episode. We'll probably be tackling another misunderstood aspect of health. Could be something like circadian rhythm sabotage, or why your gut bacteria might be hosting a game show you didn't sign up for. You never know.
I'm excited already. In the meantime, check your ferritin, read Dr. Mercola's new bestseller if you want more detail, and schedule your next blood donation if your iron levels are knocking on the door of the 1,000 club. Don't be in that club. That's an exclusive membership you don't want.
Definitely not. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. We hope we put a smile on your face while potentially saving your vertebrae. This has been Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom with Ethan Foster and Alara Skye, reminding you that you can't put a price on good bones. So keep them strong, keep your iron balanced, and we'll see you next time.
Until then, stay wise, stay healthy, and remember that your cells, much like your comedic hosts, are always up to something clever. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.